From a coded message hidden inside a weather report, to a battleship swallowing over 1,000 men in 9 seconds, to a mess attendant with 0 weapons training grabbing a machine gun and fighting back anyway. This is the attack on Pearl Harbor, explained in full. The single morning that dragged a reluctant America into the deadliest war in human history. Let's rewind, because this attack wasn't some sudden act of madness or a lucky sneak attack out of nowhere. It was planned, rehearsed, and gambled on for over a year. By 1941, Japan had a serious growing problem. Its military machine ran on oil, and almost all of it came from overseas. So when America cut off oil exports to punish Japan's brutal invasion of China, Japanese leadership faced a brutal choice: pull back from the war they'd already started, or seize the oil-rich territories of Southeast Asia by force. They chose force. No other option left. But there was one obstacle standing in the way: the American Pacific Fleet, sitting quietly at anchor in Hawaii. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto was handed the job of planning the strike. And here's the twist: he didn't even want this war. He'd studied at Harvard, lived in Washington, and understood American industrial power better than almost anyone in Tokyo. He warned his own government bluntly that Japan could run wild for 6 months at most before America's factories buried them. But orders were orders, so he built one of the boldest surprise attacks ever attempted. 6 aircraft carriers, escorted by battleships and destroyers, slipped out of Japan in late November and crossed the Pacific under near total radio silence. No chatter, no signals. A fleet of over 30 ships essentially vanished for 2 weeks. Sailing a northern route American patrols weren't watching. Meanwhile, Japanese diplomats sat in Washington, calmly continuing peace negotiations, a smokescreen to buy just a few more days. And here's a detail most people never hear about. Japan built a backup trigger in case normal communication with its embassies got cut off. Tokyo would slip a coded phrase into an ordinary public weather broadcast, something like east wind, rain, which secretly meant war with the United States was coming. American codebreakers had actually cracked pieces of this so-called winds code months earlier, listening for it constantly. But the fleet moved with such total secrecy that even that early warning system never caught the signal in time. At 6 a.m. on December 7th, 1941, roughly 230 miles north of Oahu, the first wave launched. 183 aircraft, fighters, dive bombers, and torpedo bombers roared off the carrier decks into the pre-dawn dark. At 7:02 a.m., an Army radar station actually picked up the incoming swarm on screen. The young operator flagged it immediately, but the officer he reported it to assumed it was a scheduled flight of American B-17 due in that morning and waved it off. That single misread decision cost the fleet its only warning. At 7:48 a.m., the bombs started falling on Pearl Harbor. It was a lazy Sunday morning. Sailors were eating breakfast. Church bells rang across the base. Then the sky filled with enemy aircraft, and chaos hit all at once. Battleship Row took the worst of it. Within minutes, a bomb punched straight through the USS Arizona's deck and detonated her forward ammunition magazine. The explosion tore the ship apart and killed 1,177 men in under 9 seconds. Nearly half of all the deaths that morning came from that single blast. Many of those sailors remain entombed inside her hull to this day. The USS Oklahoma took multiple torpedo hits and capsized completely, trapping men inside an upside-down steel coffin. Rescue crews spent days cutting through the hull, tapping on metal, following the sound of survivors banging back from inside. But not every story that morning was disaster. Aboard the USS West Virginia, a mess attendant named Dorie Miller, a black sailor barred by Navy policy from combat training, carried his wounded captain to safety, then grabbed an unmanned anti-aircraft gun he'd never even been trained to fire, and blasted away at incoming planes He'd later receive the Navy Cross for it, one of the first Black Americans ever honored that way. The USS Nevada, burning and battered, actually got underway and tried to make a desperate run for open water, her crew refusing to just sit and sink. Japanese pilots targeted her specifically to sink her in the channel and block the harbor, forcing her to beach herself instead. By 8:25 a.m., the first wave pulled out. Then, at 8:54, a second wave of 170 more aircraft arrived to finish the job. This time they went hard after the airfields too. Hickam Field, Wheeler Field, and the seaplane base on Ford Island, where American aircraft sat parked wingtip to wingtip out in the open. An easy, devastating target. Pilots who tried to scramble found their planes already burning before they even reached the runway. When the smoke finally cleared, less than 2 hours after it began, 2,403 Americans were dead and over 1,100 wounded. 8 battleships were sunk or damaged, along with the USS Utah, a former battleship being used as a training ship, which capsized with dozens of sailors still trapped inside. Nearly 350 aircraft never got the chance to fire back, destroyed before they ever left the ground. It remains, to this day, the deadliest single morning in American military history outside of September 11th. But here's the detail that would haunt Japan later. The fleet's aircraft carriers, the ships that would actually decide the Pacific War, weren't even in port that morning. They were out at sea on training exercises, completely untouched. So were the harbor's massive fuel storage tanks and repair yards, both left standing. Japan hit hard, but it left the exact tools America needed to rebuild and strike back within reach. The next day, December 8th, President Roosevelt stood before Congress and called it a date that would live in infamy. The declaration of war passed almost unanimously within the hour, and there's one final embarrassing footnote to the whole plan. Japan's ambassadors in Washington had actually been instructed to formally deliver a 14-part message breaking off negotiations right before the attack began, technically giving notice first. But the message was long. The embassy staff were slow typing the final decoded section, and by the time they walked it over to the State Department, the bombs had already been falling on Pearl Harbor for nearly an hour. Japan's own diplomats didn't even know they were late. Overnight, an isolationist nation that had spent years insisting that this wasn't their fight, suddenly had no choice left at all. Pearl Harbor didn't cripple America. It unified it overnight. Within days, recruiting stations across the country were flooded with lines stretching around entire city blocks. Men who'd never worn a uniform suddenly desperate to enlist. And exactly 6 months later, almost to the day Yamamoto himself had predicted, the U.S. Navy would hand Japan a devastating defeat at Midway. Using those very carriers the attack had missed. Man, that single morning, less than 2 hours from first bomb to last, changed the entire course of the 20th century. Today, the USS Arizona still sits where she sank, a memorial built directly over her wreck, with a slow drip of oil still rising to the surface after more than 80 years. What locals call the Black Tears of the Arizona. But Pearl Harbor was only the spark, not the war itself. Because this is World War II, explained. From a weeping corporal in a German hospital bed to a president's son storming a beach leaning on a cane. Click this video right here, because the story only gets bigger from here.